nggak bisa, jadi setidaknya saya bisa gambar ini.
You can see local, subnational, you can call it village, you can call it towns. If there is a smaller unit, then call it like that. No?
Jadi ada lokal, pemerintahan lokal, subnasional, kalau kita boleh desa, boleh kecamatan, boleh kabupaten kota.
So this is basically like the levels of governance, maybe you can say. Yeah, and a lot of you are at this level, right?
Yes, kebanyakan banyak si pemerintahan lokal kan ya.
But this also tells you the story of how laws or policies are developed.
Dan ini juga menunjukkan bagaimana kebijakan kita dibuat, disusun.
The issues happen at the ground level, zero level, correct? Where the people are.
Isu dan masalah terjadi di komunitas, benar kan ya?
The migrants, prospective migrants, the families are at this level.
Yes. Migran dan keluarganya dan bagaimana perspektifnya ada di level lokal ini.
So the issues like collection of very high fees, illegal recruitment, abuses, they happen at the people at this level, correct?
Yes. Jadi rekrutmen yang buruk dan penipuan dan sebagainya ada di tingkat ini ya.
When you have problems at this level, you go to the village governance unit, correct?
Kalau ada isu ini, kita pergi ke kepala desa, pemerintah desa.
And to address the issue, they will probably enact an ordinance, a local legislation, so that it will be covering the bigger population and not only one person at a time. Correct?
Dan untuk menanggapinya, pemerintah desa mungkin akan menyusun peraturan-peraturan di tingkat desa yang bisa berguna bagi semua orang.
So, this is what's happening, for example, in Indonesia, in many of the districts. So this is not happening only in Lombok. Maybe in one area, there are not as many prospective migrants than in Lombok, but they are also victimized by illegal recruitment. In Jakarta, similar things are happening. Yeah? So what happens is you have these small groups.
Jadi isu-isu ini ada di setiap daerah, mungkin tidak sebanyak yang di Lombok, tapi di Jakarta ada, dan di korban-korban, sedikit korban-korban yang akan di semua daerah, dan kemudian kita bisa melihat ini di tingkat nasional.
So that leads to efforts of the national government to come up with laws and legislations and policies that will cover or address the problems being encountered at the different districts or villages.
Dan usaha di tingkat nasional ini akan menghasilkan kebijakan yang harapannya bisa mengatasi masalah-masalah di tingkat lokal.
Right? And then from the national, you realize when you read the papers that, oh my God, it's also, we have very similar problems. You will read that in the Philippines, we have very similar problems. Starting from the village to the barangay and then elevating it to the national. You realize it's also happening in Cambodia, in Vietnam, in Sri Lanka, similar problems, for example, on the issue of migrant domestic workers. And so they will try to address the issue at the level, but then if all of those barangays are having the same problem, you elevate it at the town, you elevate it at the provinces, until you elevate it at the national.
Jadi ini hari ini juga terjadi di Filipina, masalah-masalah ini terjadi di desa-desa, dan ketika ada beberapa desa di satu kabupaten yang memiliki masalah yang sama, maka regulasinya dibuat di tingkat kabupaten, dan ketika masalah itu terjadi di banyak kabupaten akan diatasi di tingkat provinsi dan seterusnya. Kemudian ketika masalah ini merata di seluruh negara akan diatasi secara nasional.
And then, so you start working on national policies, and you know it's happening in the Philippines, parallel, maybe a little bit behind, a little bit advanced, Sri Lanka, and you realize it's not only a phenomenon in Asia, that labor migration, that people would risk their lives crossing the seas and flying and all that to get a job abroad. It's happening also to many people in Latin America, in other parts of the world, in Africa, to the extent that they will risk their lives drowning in the Mediterranean Sea. So similar, very similar experiences and stories of people.
Dan ternyata pengalaman-pengalaman migrasi yang buruk ini juga terjadi di negara-negara lain, di Filipina, di Sri Lanka. Jadi di tingkat global ternyata hal yang sama juga terjadi.
So they may be following a similar process, like local, so national, and then you elevate it. Eventually it gets to the level of international. This is a global phenomenon that will require a standard where all of us will agree that maybe this is what we need to guide the different states or governments on how they will address the phenomenon.
Jadi kemudian karena ini kemudian jadi fenomena global, maka kita membutuhkan standar internasional yang bisa mengatur semua negara-negara ini untuk punya standar.
So far so good?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so the next thing is at the international, then this is more likely the image that you will get. You are elevating the issue on human rights violations at the United Nations, or you are elevating the issue of workers' exploitation at the International Labour Organization. Both these bodies are United Nations bodies. The members are governments at the UN, and the members of the ILO are tripartite. You have the states, you have the governments, you have the workers association, and you have the employers association. And they discuss, and you will recall if some of you are engaging already with the UN or with the ILO, they will not only be like looking at it like, oh, I feel that it's happening in Asia and Philippines and Indonesia and Sri Lanka, it's happening in other parts of the world. They will look for evidence. And that's why they will usually send out questionnaires or global surveys to really get the evidence that this is something that will require the response of the international community.
Nah, ketika kita menaikkan masalah ini ke tingkat internasional, ada pelanggaran HAM, kita ada PBB, ada ILO yang PBB anggotanya adalah negara-negara dan ILO anggotanya tripartit, sektor swasta, negara, dan buruh. Kemudian didiskusikan di PBB tentang fenomena global ini dan kemudian mereka mencari bukti-bukti tentang pelanggaran HAM ini dan maka kemudian dilakukan survei secara global untuk menanggapi masalah ini.
So that is what, for example, would happen with this International Convention on the Protection of Migrant Members of the International Protection of the Rights of all Migrant Workers and Members of their families in 1995. So it was such a global phenomenon that migrants from Africa are dying when they cross the seas, and the European governments are very much scandalized. Oh my God, this is a shame on mankind, etc., etc. It prompted the UN to craft a standard that will protect the migrant workers.
Jadi inilah yang waktu itu terjadi ketika kemudian tersusun Konvensi Perlindungan Buruh Migran dan Keluarganya tahun 1995 karena waktu itu ada migrasi dari Afrika dan mereka melewati laut Mediterania dan mereka meninggal di laut dan ini merupakan standar besar untuk negara Eropa, maka kemudian ini menjadi pemicu untuk pembahasannya di PBB.
So they go through many meetings, technical working groups, etc., etc., then they put it to a vote. In the case of the Migrant Workers Convention, the General Assembly just unanimously adopted it. They didn't even subject it to a vote. So meaning that the international community recognizes the urgency of coming up with a convention to protect the migrant workers and the members of their families.
Dan saat itu kemudian dibentuk tim kerja dan pertemuan-pertemuan dan biasanya konvensi itu diputuskan dengan hitungan suara. Tapi untuk kasus konvensi perlindungan buruh migran dan keluarganya sidang umum waktu itu langsung menyetujui tanpa pemungutan suara yang berarti mereka memahami adanya urgensi untuk melakukan perlindungan terhadap buruh.
In a similar fashion, you will recall ILO Convention 189. Do you know what 189 is all about? 189. Decent work for domestic workers. Hey. Yeah? So 2010, so again, this whole issue of domestic workers, whether in the country or overseas, the migrant domestic workers, the whole issue is the exploitation, the abuse against domestic workers, whether local or overseas. This is happening in Asia, it's happening in Latin America, it's happening in Africa, it's happening all over. It prompted the ILO to set the standards of protection for migrant domestic workers.
Hal yang sama juga terjadi di ILO, Konvensi 189 tentang pekerja rumah tangga, baik yang di dalam negeri maupun di luar negeri, tahun 2010, karena adanya eksploitasi dan pelanggaran-pelanggaran hal yang sama di Asia, Amerika Latin, di Afrika dan sebagainya, yang kemudian membuat mereka memutuskan bahwa memang harus ada standar perlindungan internasional.
So they deliberate, they do surveys, and then they agree. Like in the case of the domestic workers, the majority of the member states and the other social partners of the ILO voted that they should have a convention and not just a recommendation. Okay? Similarly, in the case of the UN, their process is they will adopt a convention, but then they will subject it to ratification of the member states, where in order to voluntarily bind themselves, the member states, to the provisions of the convention.
Jadi kemudian setelah survei dan sebagainya, mereka memutuskan tidak hanya rekomendasi, tapi konvensi yang mewajibkan kemudian negara untuk meratifikasi dan mengikat negara-negara anggotanya untuk mematuhi persyaratan yang ada di dalamnya.
So these are the examples of the UN conventions and also of the ILO conventions. I think you discussed that already before.
Ini contohnya konvensi PBB. Saya kira teman-teman sudah punya keterangan tentangnya.
Okay, now I go back to this. So you already have the convention, universally minimum standards of protection is the way to be on the level of implementation or realization of the provisions of that convention. So there is a committee being formed, for example, for the Convention on Migrant Workers, there is a committee for migrant workers. And when Indonesia ratified, when did you ratify?
Kapan yang kita ratifikasi? Jadi sebelumnya ketika konvensi ini adalah standar universal yang disetujui oleh semua negara. Kemudian kita punya mekanisme pelaporan dan setiap negara yang menandatangani harus melakukan laporan secara berkala tentang implementasi konvensi ini. Dan untuk komite dan ada juga komite untuk konvensi buruh migran. Kapan Indonesia sudah menandatangani?
2012. And your first reporting was 2017.
Is that true? 2012.
Is it true? When did you know?
Iya, harusnya kan tahu.
So when did Indonesia ratify the Convention on Migrant Workers?
Jadi tanda tangan tahun berapa tadi?
Oh, anyway, that's part of your assignment. So after ratification, then you have to, part of the obligation is to report. And my understanding is the first report to the Committee on Migrant Workers was in 2017. Is that correct?
Laporannya setelah ratifikasi tahun 2017 ya.
Yeah? So there was engagement at the UN Committee on Migrant Workers in 2017 by the Indonesian government. They submit reports on the provisions, on how the provisions of the Migrant Workers Convention are implemented or realized in Indonesia and for Indonesian migrant workers. So from 2017 and out of that, engagement in 2017, primarily by the Indonesian government, and also being supported or with CSOs also engaging, the committee issues a report which becomes, or which is called the UN Committee on Migrant Workers concluding observations and recommendations for the Indonesian government.
Jadi kemudian Indonesia di tahun 2017 itu melaporkan ke Komite Perlindungan Pendidikan DTP tentang implementasi dari konvensi ini kepada orang Indonesia atau yang terjadi di Indonesia. Laporan ini disusun oleh pemerintah Indonesia dengan dukungan CSO. Lalu setelah laporan ini, komite mengeluarkan kesimpulan observasi dan rekomendasi.
Did any one of you participate in the submission of the CSOs?
Ada yang
The UN
partisipasi
2017?
waktu itu?
Kan JBN berpartisipasi orang.
So some of you participated. You did? Okay, good. So the inputs of civil society will be considered as additional information by the committee because of course the official party to engage is the government. But you can imagine that as government, you will not say that to the committee that, oh, we did not do this, we did not do this. Instead, their report will say, oh, we accomplished this, we managed to do this, we developed this. So it's all about positive things. So it is up to the non-state party, civil society, to say, oh, this is the real picture, this is the context. So it's not, everything is not really as they say it is. So, but unless there is additional information contrary to what the state reported, then the committee will not know. Okay? That's how it is.
Jadi yang utama melaporkan adalah pemerintah, apakah mereka sudah memenuhi konvensi atau belum. Dan seperti biasanya pemerintah pasti akan melaporkan hal-hal yang positif saja bahwa mereka sudah memenuhi semua aturan dalam konvensi. Maka dibutuhkan input dari masyarakat sipil dan LSM untuk melaporkan hal-hal yang tidak dilaporkan oleh pemerintah yang biasanya memang bertentangan dengan laporan pemerintah.
But what is usually the content or the outline of the report of Indonesian government? They will, from there, they will refer to what they have been doing at the national, and to substantiate what's happening in the national, they will get information from the district, from the village. And of course, the ones that will provide the information will be part of the government structure. So, what I'm saying is, unless there is additional information from other sources, then the committee will not know about that. So, unless there is submission. Okay?
Jadi karena laporan ini dibuat pemerintah, pasti pemerintah juga mengumpulkan.
Brother, you want to sleep? Just sit with him.
Ya,
You switch seats.
Kalau ada ya.
And you have like that. So sorry.
Jadi pemerintah
I mean, stand up and run. Just quick jump.
ya berdiri.
One, two, three. Okay. Up.
Ayah.
Okay, take your seat. We have to finish this. Awake. Okay. So,
Jadi pemerintah bisa mengumpulkan laporan-laporannya dari daerah-daerah. Jadi kalau tidak ada sumber lain, maka laporan yang sampai ke PBB itu juga hanya yang positif-positif saja.
So okay, the meeting is finished. It's usually like 1 day, 2 days, right? So the committee will issue concluding observations and recommendations to Indonesia. And this is available online. You can download it and you can double check immediately after the engagement. That report goes back to the Indonesian government. It goes back to the Indonesian government with a word that you have to implement this set of recommendations. So it goes back to this, and then they will have to go back again to the local. So the challenge here is, as civil society, how do you benefit from those concluding observations and recommendations. Because usually the recommendations would be about the gaps or the deficits or the shortcomings of the government in terms of implementing the provisions of the Migrant Workers Convention.
Jadi pelaporannya sendiri hanya akan 1-2 hari dan kemudian komite akan menyampaikan kesimpulan observasi yang bisa dibaca online dan mereka akan kembalikan itu ke pemerintah Indonesia dengan rekomendasinya. Dan pemerintah sebenarnya berkewajiban untuk menyampaikan lagi ini ke tingkat lokal. Jadi tantangannya adalah bagaimana masyarakat sipil memanfaatkan rekomendasi ini, karena biasanya rekomendasi ini berisi tentang hal-hal yang belum terpenuhi yang harus dilakukan dalam konvensi.
And when it goes back to the government, it goes back all the way to the grassroots. The idea is to improve. So including legislations, improvement in legislations, making sure that your legislations are aligned with the provisions of the convention. So this is how you improve. So from there you start again, and then you try to improve the laws until you get again to the national, and who knows, in another time it may require another convention. But that's how these things take place. So the laws are not written in stones. What is kind of like written in stones are our inherent human rights. And the laws, whether you're talking of local, national, or international, are only approximations of those laws, of those rights. So it's not going to be perfect like one-to-one, but that's how it keeps on evolving. So this is a dynamic process.
Dan kemudian ketika kembali ke tingkat komunitas dari nasional, lokal ke komunitas, diharapkan bahwa kondisinya akan lebih membaik, dan kemudian kembali lagi proses dari awal bagaimana kita ikut menyusun peraturan-peraturan dari lokal ke nasional untuk berkembang lagi untuk mendekati hak-hak yang bisa dinikmati oleh buruh migran menuju kesempurnaan.
Earlier engagements of the Indonesian government with the UN treaty bodies included engagement with the Committee on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights in 2014. You have it in your key. Also with CIDO in 2012, and also with UPR. No? And they also issue a set of observations and recommendations. And the latest one is on the CMW, from the CMW. But what you will know is that, because you are state party to many conventions, sometimes you thought that, for the Migrant Workers Convention, we will not report that we failed to do this. But you see, when you compare, for example, CESCR recommendation in 2014, it is mirrored in the 2017 recommendation under recommendation on right, for example, to social security. So they are linked to each other. So whether you're talking of conventions of the UN or you're talking of conventions of the ILO, there is no escape for the state party of its obligations.
Jadi pemerintah Indonesia misalnya sudah melaporkan di Komite Ekonomi Sosial Budaya tahun 2014 tentang hak-hak perempuan SIDAW tahun 2012, kemudian ada IPR, dan kalau kita membandingkan laporan-laporan konvensi ini sebenarnya agak-agak mirip gitu. Jadi di antara yang tahun 2014 sampai 2017, di antara laporan-laporan konvensi itu sendiri semuanya saling terkait dan mirip-mirip gitu. Jadi sebenarnya tidak ada alasan bagi pemerintah untuk bisa melarikan diri dari kewajiban untuk melaporkan.
And another example, in the UPR of Indonesia in 2012, the second cycle, part of the recommendation already is to ratify the Convention on Enforced Disappearances. And you will recall that in the 2017 CMW recommendation, it is also to ratify. The recommendation is to ratify the CDP. So it's not like, oh, 2012, maybe the UN forgot already. No, they have a way of checking and making sure that the recommendations are coherent. Whether you're talking of the CIDO, you're talking of the CESCR, or the CRC, or the CMW, or the UPR, or the ILO conventions, they align, they are harmonized with each other.
Jadi misalnya lagi di rekomendasi UPR tahun 2012 ada rekomendasi tentang ratifikasi konvensi soal penghilangan paksa yang kemudian ini diulang lagi di rekomendasi tahun-tahun berikutnya dan kemudian juga di rekomendasi yang dari ILO, jadi semuanya saling berkait agar rekomendasi ini tetap terus disampaikan sampai pemerintah Indonesia melakukan.
And therefore, how you will look at it as well should be comprehensive and holistic. This morning, I don't understand much, but I think Dina, for example, was also sharing about the recent developments that impact on the rights of migrant workers. For example, ILO Convention 189 that I think you have not ratified yet, no? And then you have the ASEAN Consensus, non-binding as it may be, but then you may utilize probably some of the provisions in the ASEAN Consensus. We speak a lot about the commitment of the Indonesian government on the SDGs. We were speaking also of the engagement of Indonesia and the other countries apart from the ASEAN in the Abu Dhabi dialogue and in the Colombo process. And the recent one was the Global Compact for Migration. So it's a whole lot of issues to think about, and you are operating at the local level, but unfortunately these things are very much linked to each other. But you have to locate yourselves for the level of work that you are doing to say, okay, how can SDG place in my work in Lombok or in the... Sorry, I always like Lombok because I don't remember the it's
Jadi bagaimana cara kita memandang hal ini sebenarnya secara integral, secara utuh. Jadi misalnya Dina tadi sudah bicara tentang dampak ILO dan konvensi-konvensinya, ada konsensus di tingkat ASEAN yang meskipun tidak mengikat bisa kita pakai juga, ada Indonesia ikut SDG, ada dialog dan yang terakhir Global Compact. Tapi bagaimana kita bisa menggunakan hal-hal tersebut yang sebenarnya saling terkait untuk kerja kita di tingkat lokal. Misalnya bagaimana kita bisa menggunakan SDG untuk mendesakkan peraturan-peraturan di tingkat lokal.
They may look and they may sound so far away from us, so remote, but come back. And we are talking of Singapore. Yeah, so what is the connection? And then you add to it the SDGs, the regional consultative process, big words, huh? Yeah, ASEAN Consensus, maybe it's a bit closer to the Global Compact and all those things. But what are the issues they have been talking about for so many years? It's the same. It's about decent work for migrant workers. It's about not collecting fees to get a job. It's about decent work so that in Indonesia, so they don't need to leave the country. So the issues are similar. The platforms may be different, but then it's not like you are not talking of the same things. And again, I would go back to the first slide that everything starts and ends at the level of where you are, at ground zero.
Jadi memang kelihatannya hal-hal ini kelihatan jauh dan kita ini apa hubungannya sih gitu, SDG itu jauh sekali gitu. Tapi sebenarnya yang dibicarakan di dalamnya ada hal-hal yang sama tentang kerja yang layak, tentang bagaimana kita tidak harus membayar untuk bekerja. Jadi semuanya berawal dan berakhir di tingkat lokal.
Okay, so your assignment. I go back to the Committee on Migrant Workers, the recommendation. As a state party to the Convention on Migrant Workers, the Indonesian government is obliged to promote, respect, and fulfill the rights of migrant workers in Indonesia. So you're talking of foreign workers in Indonesia, because you have a lot as well, from Malaysia also, and from other ASEAN countries and elsewhere, right? But then at the same time, being also very much obligated to protect and promote and fulfill the rights of Indonesian migrant workers going outside the country, as well as the members of their families, the children, etc. So you actually have, your government is quite busy on both fronts, looking after the Indonesian migrant workers and the families, and at the same time being taken to task to make sure that the foreign workers in Indonesia, including the members of their families, are equally taken care of. That is the obligation under the Convention on Migrant Workers.
Jadi kembali lagi ke rekomendasi, pemerintah wajib mempromosikan, menghormati dan memenuhi hak-hak pekerja luar negeri, baik yang di Indonesia, jadi orang-orang asing yang bekerja di Indonesia, dan TKI kita yang berada di luar negeri, dan memastikan mereka mendapatkan hak-haknya.
Is that clear? Yeah, that is the obligation of Indonesia. And you will see a lot of those recommendations pertaining to the foreign workers also in Indonesia. So a lot are being challenged to the government of Indonesia on how to protect effectively the Indonesian migrants abroad, but also on how they will treat humanely the foreign workers in Indonesia.
Jadi tantangan juga bagi pemerintah Indonesia untuk melindungi tenaga-tenaga kerja asing yang bekerja di Indonesia. Jadi ini tugas kelompok. So
Okay, so you're advanced.
Yeah,
so your assignment, your activity is this. So I think we can manage to have a copy of the recommendations. There is one, the version straight from the UN, and then there is one where the DTP staff put it under thematics. Yeah, so your activity, just to test if you can locate the work that you are doing based on the earlier discussions, you select a recommendation, or maybe I don't know how many recommendations. You try to understand what are the rights violated and why that kind of recommendation. And then you discuss how the recommendations may be relevant in your work, principally at the advocacy. But it could be about cases, it could be about data collection. Some of you spoke about the lack of data. Because you start off with data. Otherwise you cannot okay, if you're saying there's a lot in Lombok, how many is a lot? Because you have to, okay, I will say. Where are you from? Cilacap, yeah. So, because the resources will vary depending on how many. So it's a lot, you have to give a figure. It cannot be, it's a lot, and it's a few. What's a lot and what is a few? So data collection is important. So it may be on different issues. So discuss, identify the activities to respond to the recommendations. It may be addressed to your local government, to your district, to your national. But of course, make sure that what you will have to imagine when you discuss this is not hypothetical. You are talking about you and the recommendations of the UN. So how do you relate it to the work that you do? If you say, we have to lobby the national government, but then you're very far. You're from, is it far?
Yeah, very far away.
And you're very far from the capital. No, it's not that way. So try to make it really like, okay, this is it, and how do we do it?
Jadi tugas kita adalah memilih rekomendasi yang ada di dalam laporan, kemudian mengenali hak apa yang dilanggar, kemudian mendiskusikan di dalam kelompok tentang bagaimana rekomendasi itu bisa relevan dalam kerja advokasi kita, kemudian mengidentifikasi kegiatan-kegiatan yang dapat dilakukan sesuai dengan rekomendasi di pemerintah yang sesuai dengan tingkat kinerja kita.
You can go for the more practical concern. For example, in the recommendation, it says that within 2 years, that is by October 1, 2019, this year, given information on the implementation of recommendations in paragraphs 11, 35. This is all about legislations and policies. Coming up with a comprehensive migration legislation, amendment to the administrative, to the law on administration of detention for undocumented migrants in Indonesia, birth registration both for migrant children in Indonesia and the children of Indonesian migrants abroad, and how to do a recruitment system under public administration. So the deadline for this is to be taken up by the committee already this year in October. So you may want to seriously consider this and what you can do at your level and coordinate with the others, probably in the other places, all the way to bring it to the attention of the capital or the ministries. But this can be very practical and there is a timeline to it as well. So maybe that is one that you can also think about. It wasn't, I don't know, or I did not see it.
Contohnya ini ada rekomendasi yang harus dipenuhi Oktober 2019 ini tentang adanya kumpulan laporan tentang peraturan-peraturan migrasi, soal migrasi dan undang-undang tentang akte kelahiran. Jadi mungkin dengan rekomendasi ini apa yang bisa kita lakukan di tingkat lokal?
Yeah. So and then in the matrix, this is nice because I put it under thematics. But I did not see the one on the recommendation. There's a whole lot on domestic workers and on return and reintegration as well. And I think these are some of the concerns of some of you this morning articulated, like there should be viable return and reintegration, livelihood activities, etc. And of course domestic workers issues.
Jadi Amis sudah mengklasifikasikan berdasarkan tema soal rekomendasi ini dan juga ada soal buruh migran yang sebenarnya relevan dengan apa yang sudah disampaikan kawan-kawan pagi ini.
Okay, so now it's time for me to stop talking and for you to start working.
Saya berbicara, kalian ganti bekerja.
But how do you want to do this? Do you want to do it by region? How are the groups divided? How are the groups divided? Or how do you suggest to go about this? Just not all the recommendations, but some that you can actually relate to. You choose. And then maybe think about it. Is there anything that resonates with the work that you're doing? Or maybe do you want to focus on the written information needed in October 2019? What is the pleasure of the group?
Jadi tergantung kenikmatan masing-masing grup bisa memilih apakah 1-2 rekomendasi saja yang memang benar-benar sesuai dengan kinerja kita sehari-hari atau mau fokus di satu soal laporan tertulis tentang peraturan-peraturan, mau kelompoknya mau per daerah mau gimana terserah.
Patrick.
Yes, I just wonder if it would be good to focus on the CMW recommendations they have in Bahasa.
Okay, do you
Because
have it in Bahasa?
They have the
You have a
CMW, yeah, they have
Okay.
copies in Bahasa.
Yeah.
And because one of the actions taken by the group earlier was to contact MOFA and ask for translation of the recommendations into Bahasa. Now they have something that they can discuss directly with different levels of government. So picking out which recommendations will be most useful for you in your advocacy from those Bahasa recommendations, I think. Because in Bahasa it becomes much more accessible to have the dialogue with government.
Yeah.
Mungkin kita akan fokus ke laporan CMW yang sudah diterjemahkan ke bahasa Indonesia, dan karena kita di pelatihan kemarin juga sudah praktek mengirim surat ke Kemenlu untuk meminta terjemahan, jadi kita mungkin bisa bekerja berdasarkan rekomendasi CMW.
So, Dina, may I ask what do you suggest? suggestion how to go about the grouping. So that it's not just going to be an exercise like to do it for the sake of as part of the training, but maybe something that you can seriously consider in terms of moving forward the recommendations. Do you want to do it by? Are you from? How many are coming from the same region or area?
Jadi berapa yang
Different region.
sama?
Otherwise, we can just always do the usual, you count off and then random, just random.
Ada mungkin dari Indonesia Timur, NTT, NTB,
East Indonesia,
Jawa Timur,
Lombok mah, Lombok. Sama yang dari mana?
And maybe again, so about this
Dari
suggestion,
rumah, Mbak.
let's do it because yeah, it's time is running.
Gak cuma latihan buat pelatihan ini saja, tapi diharapkan bisa menjadi program kita setelah
Jawa Tengah, Mas.
pelatihan memang kita akan kita lakukan. We will divide it into East Indonesia, Central Indonesia.
Okay, yeah. And then again, maybe, I mean, Lovey. You may want to consider this recommendation on the follow-up to the treaty bodies, that by October 1, the CMW is requesting for a written information on the implementation of the following: comprehensive legislation for migration, amending the law, possible amendment of the law on administrative detention for undocumented migrants, birth registration both for Indonesian and migrant workers' children, and then a recruitment system being set up under public administration. So you may want to look at it. This is something that, for example, is it an issue in your area on the registration of children of Indonesians and children of foreign workers in Indonesia?
Jadi kalau saya boleh melobi, saya ingin kita berdiskusi soal rekomendasi yang harus disampaikan pemerintah Indonesia soal implementasi peraturan-peraturan buruh migran, soal penahanan buruh migran tanpa dokumen, tentang anak-anak buruh migran baik yang asing yang lahir di sini atau anak TKI yang lahir di luar negeri, kemudian soal recruitment yang harus diumumkan secara publik.
tapi
So you group yourselves as suggested by Nina, if it's okay with you. Are we clear? Is it okay? Hello? You're good? You're good? Okay, so you go and group yourselves. And is it clear? You choose the recommendations that you think you can do something about?
Sudah jelas ya, kita pilih rekomendasi dan bahwa rekomendasi itu bisa kita lakukan nanti.
And if things are not very clear, then you can approach.
awalnya saya ya Indonesia Timur Tengah sama Barat ya, termasuk Lampung. Tapi melihat dari apa yang mau didiskusikan, saya menawarkan itu nanti misalnya dibuat nasional dengan misalkan teman-teman yang di Jakarta khususnya, yang itu lebih dekat dengan pemerintahan pusat dan pemerintah teman-teman yang ada di daerah. Kira-kira akan lebih baik yang nasional dan daerah. Kira-kira soalnya challenge-nya berbeda. Kalau misalkan di daerah dia yang harus di-approach siapa, meskipun kemudian meskipun dia akan terkoneksi dengan yang teman-teman yang di pusat gitu. Ada yang sekarang ada kawan kita yang dari luar negeri, satunya dari Timur Tengah lah ya, satunya dari Malaysia. Makanya jadi 3 grup seperti itu. 3 grup ya, berarti mungkin di mejanya Pak Roland yang dari luar negeri, terus di sini di sana pusat, terus di sini di daerah. Yang teman-teman daerah.
So, okay? So can we do this like maybe 20 minutes?
Yes.